The moment the skyline over Pokrovsk turned into a jagged line of fire, the scale of Russia's disaster became impossible to hide. Entire blocks collapsed in seconds. Artillery rolled through the city like thunder, and somewhere inside that storm, Russian units, some drawn from penal colonies, others from infected regiments of the 1435th and 1437th Motorized Rifle, were cut down so fast their commanders couldn't count the bodies. What kind of country burns through 30,000 soldiers in one city in a single month and still calls it progress? This was Pokrovsk, a city that by late 2025 had become a graveyard for 110,000 Russian soldiers since the beginning of the wider Donetsk push. But to understand why Pokrovsk became the most brutal choke point of the war, we must rewind. Before the siege turned the city into an open wound, Pokrovsk was a mining hub. Ordinary, industrial, and almost anonymous. A place known for coal, railway lines, and workers. Not a symbol or strategic prize, until geography made it one. Yet geography had other plans. Pokrovsk sat in the heart of the Donetsk region. Its location is connected directly to defensive lines near Kramatorsk. That made the city valuable, but its significance went beyond logistics. It was one of the few cities in western Donetsk that refused to fall early in the war. Its defiance became a challenge Moscow felt obligated to crush. Once the Kremlin framed it that way, a siege logic took hold. The siege timeline began in mid-July 2024. Russia launched a larger offensive in western Donetsk and started tightening the circle around Pokrovsk by targeting nearby towns. The build-up was visible to everyone. The only question was how long the defenders could hold once the pressure reached full weight. When the assault finally landed, it was not a dramatic single strike. From late July onward, it became a slow, grinding choke. Russian artillery tore at the city's edges every day, smashing positions that barely existed anymore. Drones hovered overhead, feeding coordinates to gunners who didn't care whether a shell struck a trench, a home, or a hospital. The goal wasn't precision, it was exhaustion. By autumn, Pokrovsk wasn't being contested, it was being crushed into submission. Inside the city, Ukrainian troops were outnumbered, ratios reported as high as 8-1. Yet they turned homes, schools, and factories into defensive strongholds. When one position fell, they shifted to another street and fought again. Russian infantry advanced in waves, many of them penal units or untrained recruits. Some reports describe elements of the 1435th and 1437th regiments, including soldiers with chronic illnesses. These accounts are contested. Many visibly unwell men were pushed forward into streets filled with mines, snipers, and drone strikes. Their odds were grim from the moment they arrived. Gains were measured in meters, with high casualty estimates accompanying most advances. By January to March in 2025, Ukrainian intelligence estimated approximately 45,000 Russian losses around Pokrovsk. Independent verification is limited, not counting wounded or missing. Entire brigades entered the city with 1,000 soldiers and left with 200. Medics described casualty ratios worse than those at Bakhmut, and the situation kept deteriorating. By October 2025, losses in the Pokrovsk area were reported as high as approximately 25,000 for the month, with up to 150,000 troops committed, according to Ukrainian claims. Yet despite the scale of manpower, the front line moved by the meter. Russia called it progress. But progress in Pokrovsk was a mirage, an illusion created by stepping forward into ruins where no civilians remained, no infrastructure functioned, and nothing worth capturing still stood. The deeper root of this collapse was shaped long before Pokrovsk. Russia's war effort had shifted toward mass attrition. Without enough armor, lacking air superiority, and unable to counter Ukraine's drone-led defense, Moscow leaned on manpower instead of maneuver. It became easier to throw bodies at Ukrainian lines than to solve its strategic failures. Pokrovsk was the clearest expression of that collapse, a battlefield where one side fed its own population into destruction, while the other side used precision, mobility, and adaptation to impose catastrophic costs. By late summer 2025, as the siege peaked, Pokrovsk had been effectively erased. The skyline was torn apart. Smoke curled out of hollow apartment blocks. Streets were silent except for artillery echoes and the mechanical hum of drones searching for movement. No civilians remained, only soldiers and ruins. The city's main hospital, one of the last operational structures, was hit twice in 1 week until it collapsed into rubble. The railway station turned into a skeleton of twisted metal. In late spring 2025, even the city's old clock tower, a landmark that survived decades of Soviet rule and independence, was flattened by a missile. What remained was a wasteland stripped of life. Power lines were gone. Water systems were destroyed. Roads were shattered into craters so deep, even armored vehicles struggled to cross. Generators hummed in underground shelters like ghosts, keeping minimal equipment alive. At night, there were no lights, only the faint glow of distant fires and flares. For Russia, the human cost reached levels that defied military logic. Units that should have rotated out weeks earlier were still fighting. Exhaustion became a constant. Entire brigades were stitched together with replacements who barely knew their commanders. Soldiers slept in holes or collapsed basements. Medical support was overwhelmed. Field hospitals overflowed with men missing limbs, covered in dust and blood. Some treated without anesthesia. Many didn't survive long enough to be evacuated. Commanders often recorded deaths as missing in action to soften the casualty reports sent back home. Reported intercepts suggested refusals to advance and instances of command friction. Claims that, verified or not, reflected the despair produced by sustained losses and exhaustion. Whether each rumor was factual mattered less than the fact that such rumors existed. They revealed the despair inside the Russian ranks. The illusion of invincibility had evaporated. Meanwhile, Ukraine suffered significant losses. Analyst and official estimates place Ukrainian losses at approximately 10,000 across Donetsk in early 2025, with approximately 5,000 tied specifically to Pokrovsk. For a country with limited manpower, the toll was heavy, yet it remained only a fraction of Russia's staggering losses. Ukrainian units rotated regularly, adapted tactics quickly, and used drones with precision. Their defense relied on discipline, communication, small unit coordination, and endurance rather than massed firepower. It was enough to keep the city contested month after month. The global implications of Pokrovsk's destruction were clear. Russia's doctrine had decayed into attrition. Human waves replaced coordinated assaults. Penal units and sick soldiers replaced trained professionals. Each advance cost more than the last. Military observers saw a pattern. Russia could still move the front line, but only by feeding thousands of men into the furnace for every kilometer. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defensive model, light, mobile, drone-enabled, demonstrated how weaker forces could impose devastating costs on larger armies. Even if Russia eventually planted its flag over Pokrovsk, many analysts would likely assess it as a costly, limited gain, territory taken at the cost of a generation, and yet the war inside the ruins continued. Ukrainian soldiers lived in basements and tunnels, fighting with a quiet resolve. Their world had shrunk to dust and debris. They patched up wounded comrades, reloaded, and prepared for another day that should have been impossible. Some hadn't slept in days. Some hadn't seen the sun in weeks. But they held their positions because surrender was unthinkable. Pokrovsk had become a symbol of endurance. It no longer mattered how much of the city was left. What mattered was the line they refused to abandon. If Russia captures the city, and at the time of research they were close, they will declare victory on state media. They will highlight the streets taken and buildings secured. They will speak of momentum and martyrs. But the soldiers on the ground know the truth. Units are shredded. Armor destroyed faster than replacements arrive. Morale broken. The victory Russia claims is built on scorched earth and blood, and that is the truth Ukraine will carry forward. Pokrovsk may fall on a map, but its meaning will not. The city becomes a precedent, proof that resilience can outlast any advance, and that resolve can shape future battles long after the smoke clears. Russia can claim territory, but it cannot claim the spirit that held it. What happens next will depend on how both sides learn from this moment, how they adapt, and how they measure victory beyond lines on a screen. Because the story of Pokrovsk is not ending. It is becoming a chapter others will reference when the next stand comes. And if you want to follow how this story evolves, how each new development fits into the larger war, and what this turning point means for the months ahead, make sure you're subscribed. The next update is already on the way.